we've got a wonderful panel discussion coming on shortly. The topic is inclusive and context-specific design and implementation of HDP initiatives at the cross-border level. And the moderator for that panel is Kimberly Hickok-Smith from Philatech, and I'd like us to welcome her to the stage so that she can moderate this panel. Let's welcome Kimberly.
So, good morning and welcome. I have the honor to be the moderator for today's very interesting session, which our goal is really to create a more resilient, conflict-free, and prosperous cross-border community. So, let's welcome our distinguished panel. We have a great group today who are going to lead us through these questions that we have. We'll start with Dr. Dureji Wakija, the Acting Director of IGAD Center for Pastoral Areas and Livestock Development, ECPALT, and he also implemented the IGAD Drought Disaster Resilience and Sustainability Initiative, AEGIS. Welcome, Dr. Dureji. Lieutenant Colonel retired Osai is not going to be joining us this morning. He was called by the minister, but just so you know, we'll be filming his questions. So let us now welcome Mrs. Jebuat Sundeweo, who is a project management professional and conflict management expert. She's the Chief of Party for Cross-Border Community Resilience Activity, CBCR. Welcome, Jebuat. And Yasin Salah, who's currently the Regional Resilience and Livestock Development Specialist at USAID Kenya and East Africa, where he is leading the regional resilience initiatives in the Eastern Horn of Africa. Welcome, Yasin. Just a little note of housekeeping. We are hoping to have a Q&A at the end, so please do note your questions down. We'll hold them for now, and let us begin. Everybody okay? Is everybody comfortable? Excellent. Okay, so welcome to my distinguished panelists. I'm honored to be here with you. As we all know, the borderlands are unique landscapes. Yasin, based on your experience in current interventions in the border areas, could you kindly highlight the unique challenges and opportunities inherent in the design and implementation of the HDP coherence at the cross-border level?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kimberly, and good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's enjoying the sessions. And yeah, just quick, I'm trying to set the scene for the discussion in terms of, giving you the dynamics around the cross-border landscapes in the Horn of Africa region. I think most of you understand that we have almost more than 100 million people who are living in these cross-border areas in Horn of Africa. So it really supports the livelihood of the communities in this region. And you have to understand in the context of the very dynamic landscapes where there's interaction between social, economic, and political interfaces. And these borderlands are really interconnected in the context of, you'll find same people who are living in the same borderland from the other side. And like, for example, Kenya-Ethiopia border landscape, if you look at it, you'll have the same community living on one side and the other side. So you have to understand in that context, there's an interplay between, the communities and system in this landscape. I just want to highlight some few challenges that are inherent in some of these borderlands. Insecurity is one key one. It really affects most of what you do in these borderlands. Some of you have been doing work on pastoralism, natural resource management in these landscapes. So there's a lot of, recurrent conflicts based on, resource competition. There are also underlying issues around, clanism and, and also political interfaces where you'll find there is interaction between different actors based on some political differences. This is really a key challenge that we face in these landscapes. And on top of that, I think the climate change issue that is currently, really taking toll in this area is really exacerbating the conflict in this landscape. As I mentioned, you need to understand these landscapes in the context of complexity. As I said, it's like diverse in that context. And just to give you an example of a trade, for example, if you're looking at cross-border trade in this area, personally, I come from a border landscape in Moyale, which is a cross-border landscape between Kenya and Ethiopia. What you realize is, if you look at, say, cross-border trade, it's really how it is organized in terms of, the way the communities are linking. There's some specific people who are controlling that business, and in that context, is like, and people are really utilizing the social networks in that context. So and it's more of informal businesses, So that really creates another challenge in terms of, as much as it's opportunity for some, but it's, in general, that informality is at a certain level a challenge. As many of you understand, and many of you have traveled to see some of these borderlands, they are really inaccessible, like in terms of infrastructure. For example, for you to travel from one area to another, it really takes you long. They are not connected in terms of infrastructure-wise, and this creates a bit of a barrier in terms of movement of goods and people across the landscape. And we have been talking a lot about the private sector investment. So in the context of even trying to attract private investor, it becomes a bit challenging, because if the infrastructures are not there, it really gives a bit of a challenge. Again, the other elements around, the development in these contexts. You'll find there are a number of failed development or humanitarian or peace initiative in this region, considering that some of these initiatives are looked from the national perspective. You may have a program that is funded by national government or whatever, but they really not give it that cross-border consideration. So with the national lens, so it really fails in terms of not really catering for the need of the cross-border. There's also a growing inequality, elite capture based on the fragility of these landscapes, and also the issue around weak governance. I mentioned about informal system, but also in the context of, I mentioned the connection between communities. Traditionally, they used to have their own systems of governance in terms of linking with each other, but with the coming in force of government and the rest, these traditional resource management systems or governance system has been weakened. So that really gives a bit of a challenge. And I mentioned the issue on environmental risk and climate, which is really resulting to land degradation and exacerbating conflict and food insecurity in this context. As much as I was highlighting a lot of challenges in some of these cross-border areas, there are enormous opportunities in these cross-border lands. I mentioned around trade, the linkages between these landscapes. It really creates an opportunity for the trade corridors, economic enhancement. And in that context, we can also leverage on, economic development as an entry point in terms of fostering the HDP coherence. If you communities are more economically empowered, humanitarian resources, humanitarian needs will be less, more development, more inclusive developments, and also to the greater level enhancing security. Of course, these landscapes are also very rich in natural resources, and I think most of you are aware of the opportunities that exist. There's also the issue around, there's a lot of focus of recent times around multilateral funding on some of these cross-border landscapes. Some of you might have read some reports from the World Bank and the rest who are really focusing on, trying to support multilateral funding is coming on board. Lessons that are coming from this area we can able to leverage on, and in terms of sequencing, layering, and integrating our intervention, the lessons which are coming up, we can also build on those. Yesterday there was a lot of discussion around localization. We already have local communities, institution in this area, so this can be a very important entry point for us to enhance HDP coherence. And of course, there's some coordination mechanism that exists in this area, even though a bit fluid, so we can able to leverage on those. Those are the key highlights in terms of just giving you a background on challenges and opportunities that exist in this cross-border landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yasin. So, Dereje, looking at approaches for implementing the HDP at the cross-border level, what are your key lessons and opportunities in the implementation of the HDP and best ways for scaling for impact? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yasin, for setting the scene, highlighting the issues of cross-border area. Just before I jump to the main question, I just want to highlight two issues. Taking together both the issue of cross-border and HDP, let's accept it. It's an evolving idea. We are doing it. We are also keep learning it. As IGAD, I will just focus on my organization. As we start working and closer, there are a lot of things that we are learning. What is it that, again, when the two come together in cross-border areas, is this character of spillover effect, both for acting in cross-border area, as well as acting in the spectrum of HDP. That spillover effect, it can be either positive or negative. And we need to be considerate to harness opportunities. That is the focus. I can just give you from humanitarian, how can we transition to the talk of development if we couldn't address the humanitarian crisis we have been facing in the 2 months and 3 months ago? Will that, if we are also acting not in a right way, we might also undermine the striving private sector that we are pushing in that area. We also want to do development. If people are in crisis, which development are we doing? So this is the context of the two. But what we do in development in cross-border areas also, we can't confine into political boundary because it is a socially connected area. It is a demonstration where there is regional integration for us. Yes, we talk about conflict, we talk about lack of opportunities, but there is also a lot to learn for us. So the two, there is a complication, but there is also opportunity. Considerate of that spillover effect in both is one of the key issues that are why we need to work. And that spillover is both positive and negative, and we need to consider it. The other thing is, yes, definitely interaction. There is actor and actor mandate. In mandate, if we come to political mandate, there is no incentive for you to invest on the other side of border because the political incentive is confined within country. But the actual people are benefiting. If the grazing is on the other side and there is no water, if we jointly invest on the other side, the people will benefit, resilience will be built. That's why we need to come together. There is a lack of resource, there is a lack of mandate, but when we come together, there might be a complementarity. That's what we learn in implementing IDRISI. I will call it in short, because it has 5 up to 8 priority areas. Different parties took different role, but we came together twice a year to discuss, to share, so that people will complement. It's not that perfect, but we really exercised. So resource is confined, mandate is confined. Only when we come together, we will have a better achievement to address resilience. So pick up on few lessons that I want to say is, By doing so, there is a lot of multiplier effect. We have seen from livestock market, we have seen by synchronizing infrastructure like water development in cross-border, you avoid redundancy, but also enhance complementarity. And then I have said on joint planning, again, we will live together as it is, because that is how it is, and that's one of the lessons. Otherwise, one of the difficulty in cross-border area is also there are areas that are left behind. You want to work as a unit in cross-border area, there are a lot of deterrents not to include particular cross-border area. You pay for it. You work on animal disease control, but the other side of the border is not investing because of money constraints. You can't access development fund, might be security, and so on and so forth. That kind of, if we are moving to cross-border approach, we need to also look at these barriers, either coming from the national politics, or including global, because sometimes you can't mobilize third-party funding from donors because of that constraint. I can specifically give you the cross-border areas, Karamoja in this context, South Sudan. Whatever we gain in Karamoja is negatively affected by South Sudan. So just to sum it up, my time is gone. With the way forward, I will come back to it, is institutionalizing, knowing this, the cross-border issue, HDP, into our daily action at the donor level, at the government level, at local level. How do we institutionalize? My question will come later. There is a lot of learning going on at different levels. We need also hub where we talk about a policy hub, a knowledge hub. Those are the two things that will sustain the two. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dereje. And now I'd like to welcome Jebi Watt. Considering the need to engage key stakeholders in the coordination of the HDP interventions at the cross-border level, what are the key considerations to ensure inclusive engagement of the relative stakeholders in the design and implementation at the cross-border level?
Okay. Thank you, Kimberly. I think I will still share some of the points that Yassine has mentioned, as well as Dereje here, Dr. Dereje, which is really to emphasize again the need to understand the context. We cannot really overemphasize this point. I would say the understanding of the context really helps us to understand what makes the borderlands or the cross-border areas unique. Just to add on some of the points that have been said is that, for example, in bringing stakeholders together, you try and understand who is where and what kind of information is available. So, for example, within the cross-border context, you'll find that information, many of our organizations really engage in a lot of research, but you'll find that they are very country-focused, very specific to that particular country. But when it gets to the borderlands, the information flows on what happens between one country to the next is often missing, and therefore I would say that in thinking around the stakeholders and who needs to get involved and what are the issues we need to focus on, is to realize that there needs to be much more information collection, gathering on, or even mapping on who is who and who are the stakeholders within the different contexts. Let me give you also an additional point. Like, for example, you find that the different line ministries in the different countries, they change. What for example, in Ethiopia is not the same for South Sudan or in Kenya. So the shift in terms of the administration structures, which are the line ministries, what are the different development plans of the different countries, and it changes from one context to another. So I think and also, the intersection happens not just on two countries necessarily. It can actually happen even between 3 to 4 countries. And all these are border locations that we need to engage and figure out who the stakeholders are. So I think, again, emphasizing the mapping exercise really needs to think around the knowledge, the information, the research that has been done, and where the research is absent, really emphasizing that we need to do more research that is cross-border context based. Like, for instance, I was in a discussion yesterday with somebody who had engaged in a political economy analysis on the Uganda side of the border. But that provides real information that relates only to the Uganda context. But when it crosses to the Kenya side or the South Sudan side, that information is lacking. And therefore, really, we as practitioners need to think about that. Again, networking, really, I think this is where we see the whole understanding of how important it is to network, because the need for as much information as possible, therefore also emphasizes the need for as much networking as possible. So coordination, really we cannot overemphasize the importance of consultations that need to happen, and really a level of patience as you gather this information and as you begin to understand the context a little more. And moving on, I think, is also making a deliberate effort to graduate the different sectors. Now when we get into the practice of everything. So as far as, for instance, humanitarian players are concerned, is really asking the question, do we as humanitarian actors or peace builders make a deliberate effort in the way, we say, okay, these are the people we've worked with, and now are we ready to transition them into the development side of things? Or as we as development practitioners take a pause and ask, are we willing to work with those who have just emerged out of the peace programs or the peace building programs or the humanitarian programs? So there needs to be that deliberate effort to graduate our programs to the next level. And that really, you find that really often missing. And also, when we think about coordination, should we just be talking about, okay, so this is what I've been doing, or this is what we've been doing, and take it to the next level? Is like it's not just enough to say, oh, this is what I've been doing, or what have you been doing on this side, making it deliberate to take it to the next level. Again, thinking of these stakeholders, they are the same stakeholders. It's the same stakeholders who work for the humanitarian. It's the same stakeholders you'll find in development, even in peace building. So really emphasizing that coordination, networking, and speaking to each other is critical.
Thank you for those great action points, Jebua. Now, Dereje, back over to you. You've talked about some lessons learned, and how do we best institutionalize these approaches at the regional level, especially through engagement of your member states?
Thank you very much. Once again, I just want to go back to highlight a few opportunities that are existing and then how we continue to build on it. I would say there is growing awareness about the need of looking at the cross-border areas as one system. There is a lot of talk. You can see most of the people in this environment are familiar with it. There is also understanding within government. There are opportunities like in this region, we have IGAD that is really championing the cross-border approach. There is, because of that, we also see a lot of political commitment. I can just say the Horn of Africa initiative just 2 months or 1 month ago, the ministers of finance are sitting and discussing how to improve the situation in cross-border areas. As they have been a lot of commitment from World Bank, Africa Development Bank, European Union to support the countries, they have highlighted the cross-border areas as entry, as a development corridor. So these are the positive things that we need to keep. So how do we now institutionalize this thinking at the regional level down to the country level? It's emerging, it's going on. What is needed is to institutionalize, means to make it norm, to make it cultural practice, to make it a required procedure. And that cannot be only by government or regional organization, it's also the development supporting communities, the civil society, the donors. This understanding has to be built into as a system. It cannot function on the air, it needs a nucleus. That nucleus is, for example, for cross-border areas, IGAD tried to establish a center in Karamoja, around Moyale, in Manera. Will those centers be a center hub for where we go and get all these lessons that we learn? Will they be facilitating the barriers we have because of the border? So these are the things that we say. We have talked for many years. We have tried to put things in place. It cannot be achieved only by one unit. Let's reflect and strengthen. There is a system now into place. It's a matter of picking. There is a willingness, as I said. There is a system on ground. We can do it. Thank you very much.
Excellent. That sounds like a wonderful, positive idea. Yasin, thanks for jumping in for Harrod. We know you know a lot about the Kenyan government. So your question is, considering the institutionalization of the HDP coherence at the cross-border level and the status of implementation by national and subnational governments, and based on the lessons learned from ending drought emergencies, how is the Kenya government adjusting structures, including policies, financing strategies, and coordination mechanisms in order to foster coherence?
Thank you very much, Kimberly. I'll try to do justice to Dr. Harrod's input. He sent me his contribution. So generally, I think what has happened in Kenya in recent years, there's been a lot of pivoting towards policy change and ensuring that the resources are allocated in terms of disaster risk management and other multiple shocks. So in his notes, he mentioned around issues on the Kenya commitments toward IDRIS initiative, ending drought, IGAD drought resilience and sustainability initiative, which is a strategy at the regional level. Kenya, through that system, has managed to develop its ending drought emergency strategy, which is an overarching policy and strategic framework on disaster risk management. And I think through that, I think yesterday he mentioned around how Kenya has made progress in terms of trying to manage the drought and other shocks in the region. And of course, there is establishment of National Drought Management Authority as one of the commitments that the government has made in terms of solving the challenges of drought issues. And of course, the government has also been really engaged in cross-border programming issues in terms of jointly, it is the one he mentioned here around Kenya and Uganda has jointly signed an MOU on cross-border collaboration in terms of implementation of integrated cross-border program for sustainable peace and development, which is an initiative that the two governments has taken together. Of course, the issues on number of regional policies that exist. Kenya has been really supporting and domesticating some of those policies that are done mostly at the IGAD level or East African Community level towards supporting, movement of people and goods around the countries. And in terms of also coordination, there's a number of working groups that the government has set up in terms of bringing different stakeholders together to address the HDP coherence issues. We have like a national level ED steering committee. At the county level, they have this county steering group that brings together all the actors in terms of solving the development, humanitarian and peace challenges. At the donor level, the government is also taking a keen interest in terms of, convening the development partners. There's an ASAL development partners group that is looking at issues of solving the issues in drought areas. With regards to the financing strategies, the government has also set up a national drought emergency fund, which is looking at building resilience and also response and recovery, which aligns very well with the HDP coherence thinking. And also, I think those are the key things that he has highlighted here in terms of what the government is really doing to enhance HDP coherence, and towards that also in terms of they have done a review of ending drought emergency. They did an evaluation of where the things are and what has been achieved. So in that context, there's some recommendation that came out of those, the evaluation, and in terms of thinking going to the next phase of the ending drought emergency. Number of issues have been highlighted in terms of clarifying the roles of responsibility of the stakeholders, and also fostering joint planning and enforcement. So I think those are the key highlights that I wanted to do on his behalf. Thank you.
That sounds great, actually. Working groups and additional finance resources. So it sounds like we're heading in the positive direction, because it's a big challenge to face. And of course, we've heard a lot about localization being at the heart of USAID investments globally. Jebawat, how can we foster engagement of the local organizations in the design and implementation of the HDP coherence? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a number of things that I've been thinking about over time, but one of the things that I thought may be very interesting is the need for us as, funding agencies or the bigger implementing agencies is really to emphasize the support of the local organizations to be all three in one. I know it's a little bit controversial or maybe even challenging or contradictory, because we tend, when we think about our practice and the kind of work we do, we tend to specialize, and we tend to gear ourselves or even the local organizations towards focusing on only one or two or at the most, but really is supporting long-term investments in local organizations to be able to take up all the three approaches HDP. And the reason being that, in fact, I would say that the local organizations have already done this. I often think that they are very clever in the way they position themselves, because, depending on who is at their doorstep, they'll put on that hat and say, oh, today we will be humanitarian. Then somebody turns up with a peace. Now they'll put on their peace hat. Then the next is, development. Yes, I can do that also. They put that hat on. And, we tend to make fun of this, is thinking that there's something wrong about it. But I think it's a survival mechanism. Number one, giving the opportunity for the organizations to survive and to thrive even through all the different seasons. But I think number two also is that is the nature of things on ground, especially thinking about the cross-border. If you do not put on the three hats at any given time, your survival is going to be a challenge. Just ask me during the COVID period for about 2 years. There are people who just literally went down completely. And today, when you look for those people, where is so-and-so, be like, somehow they disappeared. So I think it's to pick on what these local organizations have already begun to do and support them even to do it better. Again, they by nature have already done this for themselves. The fact that today I know much about humanitarian work, I can do the cash transfers, I can do the food distribution, I can do the nutrition programs at the same time. But then again, at this, I can also do livelihoods. Down the road, I'm the agriculture expert. So we shouldn't look at it necessarily as a bad thing, but we should try and build on it. Let me give an example. I recently went to the Karamoja cluster on the Kenya side of it in West Pokot, and there's this organization that has been a long-term peace-building organization. So they've grown, just waiting for the next engagement with government, for example, as far as building social cohesions, relations. And so at some point, this organization, would strengthen depending on what issues they were struggling with, cross-border conflicts or loss of livestock or livestock theft, then, programs would emerge from that. But then when things went down, the organization, would tell me that, we would slowly weaken. But then more recently, when we started working with them on a development program, they were quite fascinated that they can actually do development programs because they have long-term experience with these communities. They understand what the issues are. But because they've tended to wear the peace-building hat, they were quite surprised that they could do a lot of the agriculture-related programs that we were initiating with them. In this case, we're talking about poultry production, we're talking about beekeeping, and they're like, they are so fascinated that they can actually do this, and they already have so much knowledge and information. It's just bringing that knowledge and information within another sector, maybe hiring one or two people who may have better expertise in that area. But in terms of the long-term history of this organization, they have they know what it means to the cross-border conflicts are all about. They know the negotiations that must happen for pasture, for instance, on the Uganda side, because when the pastoralists are moving to the Uganda side, they have to negotiate how that movement will happen. But on this other side, they also are quite fascinated that they're getting involved development work. But I find that the problem is maybe we also have tended to limit them. And therefore, I think there's an opportunity here. I think the other thing is also to think that when we bring this network meetings, these coordination platforms, I think it's critical that we bring all of them together, whether they are humanitarian, development, peace. And when we do this more often, I think there's opportunity for cross-learning. There's even opportunity for people to speak, for instance, about the violence or the drought situation, and so how do we transition, like I had earlier mentioned, how do we transition now to development? But that only happens if we've been speaking to each other. So if we don't, so limiting the camp mentality and the separate. The thinking that we are different. So, and I think also finally is really to think that long-term investments in some of these local organizations and really staying the course with them, because we tend to see them, these local organizations, when we start working with them, they tend to be so influenced by what our interests and mandates or are. But the longer we stay with them, the more comfortable they are to begin to spread their wings and to feel that they can muscle up and flex their muscles and merge the HDP cohesion together. Sorry.
Relationship building, collaboration, respect, all very good, important things. Now let's move over to the context of finance. So Yassine, what do you think are the instruments fit for purpose for finance? Are there new ways of financing that can incentivize the HDP nexus approaches and ensure greater complementarity around HDP?
Yeah, I think in the context of financing, and we have, with the current multiple shocks that are coming in this space, I think it's critical for us to really look at the context-specific and flexible funding mechanism. Already there are some initiative that's already ongoing. For example, the focus-based financing model, in terms of anticipating what is coming and ensuring that you really factor in those shock-responsive programming context. Embedding the crisis modifier in the programming space is something that's being already done and being implemented and seeing how it can be leveraged on. I just mentioned the National Drought Emergency Fund that the NDMA, National Drought Management Authority in Kenya, has set up. So it's looking at building resilience, response, recovery context. So through that kind of a platform, you can able to interject more resources to ensure that those kind of funding mechanisms that are put in place is supporting both at national cross-border level. There are also other incentive funds. There are a number of initiatives that's going in the region. For example, in Kenya, we have these investment for Northern Kenya Fund. It's called INC Fund. That's looking at trying to bring the private sector investment in mostly underserved areas in Northern Kenya. So it's looking at investment in terms of bringing the private sector, but in it we have elements on building peace, social cohesion. Supporting the government to set up policies that are related to disaster risk management, climate adaptation, and the rest. So these are the kind of funding mechanisms that we can leverage on. Of course, there are a number of other insurance mechanisms that has been in place. For example, on livestock, crop, and the rest. So how do we contextualize these in terms of looking at the HDP elements in the region? Regionally, I think IGAD has also proposed like a disaster response fund. I don't know to Dr. Darizia might be able to say something on that, but trying to pool resources at the regional level to ensure that the needs are met, and ultimately, of course, the issue on integrating disaster risk management into the planning and budgeting processes, and that's something that can be given consideration. In terms of new ways, there's a lot of focus in this meeting about private sector engagement. How do you leverage on that to come up with an innovative solutions, anticipatory actions, and also funding for local institutions. I think we mentioned around, the HDP coherence and the fit with local institutions and local level kind of actors. So going forward, how that can be an area that we can explore to ensure that local institutions get adequate resources to implement the HDP coherence. And also we have to be very innovative in terms of the number of other initiatives that is going on in terms of multilateral funding, for example, for climate change. Most of you heard about the Green Climate Fund. There's a huge resources there. Considering that climate affects humanitarian development and peace context, how do you ensure that when the countries are putting together their proposals and concept towards the Green Climate Fund funding, how do you bring in these HDP coherence elements as a mechanism to get funding through the system? I think that's just a key thing that crossed my mind in the context of financing. Thank you.
That's wonderful, and I'm pleased to look out and see very few of you looking at your phones. I appreciate that you're actively listening. So, and we're doing very well on time. So now we're going to have Dr. Dereje is going to talk to us about looking forward. So what are the key considerations when we look at the HDP coherence at the cross-border level? How do you want us to move forward? What are your thoughts?
Thank you very much. Yeah, where are we heading? I think one of the facts in cross-border area is high level of vulnerability built historically. There's still a lot of it.
Everybody awake now?
Thank you very much. A lot of issues to address. I will just complement what Yasina has been saying. Yes. We are trying to address issues to save life, again, also to contribute to sustainable development, to contribute to resilience development. We need to, again, also step back and reflect for how long shall we continue like this. The focus is also thinking about how do we build infrastructure, not the physical infrastructure so that the other players also come in. You can see there is a big finance gap. Without involvement of the private sector, we will not come out of this challenge. What is this infrastructure? We are thinking that, yes, risk is there. There are some risks that can be absorbed by individuals. There are some risks that are higher that needs a little bit of support. There are too much vulnerable people that will be completely swept if you don't really cover their risk. This can not be only by government. So we need the involvement of the private sector. That private sector needs infrastructure. What are the policy environment? Because they look for return. It's in all aspects. We try to source feed during emergency. There is no feed in that context. A huge land, there's a still potential to have a reserve feed where you can source within that, but how can you do it? So looking at also infrastructure that allow others to function, tap up the resource in that area, and make society ready, individuals ready, government ready to respond to this situation. That's what I can say. Centrally, as we say, we are in the continuing learning phase of bringing the three together, as well as also looking at the cross-border as a unit. And then we need a hub where we look at as a policy hub, a hub where we also deposit our lessons, people who can use, a hub who can facilitate crossing the borders, the border between institution, the physical border, so that what we are aspiring will be achieved. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Are you with me? Thank you very much, my panel. Can we give them some appreciation? Our team goal for this session was that by the end of it, you would have a better understanding of the importance of cross-border communities and the need for collaboration and coordination to improve the regional prosperity. Do you think we've gotten there? It's still a lot to do, right? There's a lot of work, because our cross-border communities are so important, and they tend to be neglected. We tend to focus on other things, but when it comes to trade and understanding, it's really important. And so now we would like to hear from you all. Questions or comments are very, very welcome. Hopefully there are some microphones going around, many of which may work better than ours. Let's see. And we welcome your questions. We have about 15 minutes, so we should be able to do at least 5. Let's start here. Have we got some microphones? I can give you mine. Oh, okay, we're on it. please feel free to direct your question to a certain person.
Thank you so much. My name is Tarim. I come from Uganda, the South. In the region of Kigezi. I have at least a piece of question for each one of them, starting with Yasin. Challenges to Uganda trade and business in southern Sudan include concerns of corruption, discrimination, poor road conditions, and language barriers, among others. Recently, Ugandan traders were killed in southern Sudan. Ugandan goods stopped at Busia border to Kenya. Non-payment for Ugandan merchandise in southern Sudan, and slow interventions seem to be done in response to this debilitating development. Where do you see the growth in trade in the border areas in the next 1 decade? To Dr. Dreji, what's being done at the regional level concerning cattle rustling and intertribal conflicts involving loss of lives in Uganda, Kenya, and southern Sudan? Any specific ideas that can be followed through? And to my sister Jebi, do you see funding organizations starting to support system growth of organizations, not only projects, in order to become sustainable, thereby creating an enabling environment among the local organizations? Now, this bearing in mind the aspect of local knowledge and then the basis of the same. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. I think it's a tough one in terms of how do you project the trade in the next 10 years in our region, having the challenges you mentioned around, trade and non-trade, barriers that we are having, tariffs and non-tariff barriers that we're experiencing in the region. I think there is an opportunity, with African trade, AfCAFTA, African inter-Africa trade regime that is coming. Different countries have really endorsed that, leveraging on that. I see that one as an opportunity to solve some of these challenges. Already there are ongoing initiatives in terms of harmonization of trade issues between different communities, and you've realized as much as we do have those challenges, there are also a lot of opportunities and progresses that have been made in terms of, for example, if you look at the duration that takes in terms of transporting goods and services between these countries, with harmonization of policies, some of these, the number of the period that is taken to transport goods and services between the countries have been reduced. Also leveraging on the local context. I mentioned around interconnectedness of these communities. How do you put, for example, the role of the local institution and the local stakeholders at the local level to be part and parcel of solving that challenges? At the national level, you might have challenges between governments to sort out this problem. But in terms of engaging those local institutions and communities who are already interested party, we really need to leverage on those. There are a number of times when you have conflicts in some of these areas, the elders and the rest have been playing a critical role. I see that one as also an area that we can leverage on to reduce those conflicts. But of course, I think if you have seen statistics, inter-Africa trade, trade between African countries is really, really very low. And for us to really increase that, I think we really need to reduce those barriers, as you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my brother. A challenging question. I try to address it. It's not that we have not done at the regional level, but as you have reflected, cattle rustling is still a trademark in this region. Equally, it's devastating the livelihood of people who are affected. Overnight, you can lose whatever you have altogether. But what are we doing at IGAD? IGAD, even if things are not happening, they still have this leverage of bringing together countries and discuss and moving towards where we have a consensus for a policy. That it's core of our discussion in our peace and security issue. It's a discussion when we had in our development issue. As it is going on, the C1, the conflict early warning, is trying to collect indicative variables and providing early warning for the countries to timely respond. And looking at building has a structure at grassroots level, getting data supported by IT and analyzing and providing that information. That is one aspect. The second aspect for cross-border areas, we have a platform where conflict resolution platform is in place so that when livestock, when people are seasonally moving, that discussion between the neighbor states is happening. Even though this is happening again, cattle rustling is existing, it's affecting people. We have a trans-month protocol just to make it the mobility of people and livestock orderly so that people's life will not be affected. People will be seasonally access to range and water, but in an orderly manner. It's also reducing conflict by communally agreeing routes, developing routes, providing service along that route. Those are the things that the soft issues that we are doing. But it is cattle rustling now gets serious. It's not going, and it has an aspect of governance that we are, as a development actor, we need to really support that aspect. Yes, it's a health, it's big, it's difficult to measure, but the governance infrastructure cannot be really forgotten. We always say that there is a traditional institution, traditional system, but they need the formal system to follow. What we have is people must have an option. There must be a deterrence. So we need to really marry this traditional practice, traditional institutions, with accompanying formal system to be strengthened all the way to secure. Because if there is no deterrence, we are still, whatever we are doing is losing. And at the regional level, so far, it's a discussion because you could pick, it's a lot of arms on small arms on cross-border area. Will we continue like that? It's not possible. I can just give you an example. In Uganda, in Karamojo, from 2050, all up to the start of the COVID, it was peace. We have been doing development. People were traveling day and night, cattle rustling, structure at community level, stop it. If it has happened, immediately. Then COVID come, mobility of formal system is stopped. There was a boom. Whatever we started in water infrastructure, in market, it was not being completed. What is it? Yes, there is a traditional system, but the formal system also should be there to support that. And yeah, it's a lose. It is some of, I can say that the development actors we are really not putting effort into it. It is just taking whatever effort we are doing. There must be something that we keep. It's so difficult, but we can do it. Let's look at it. How can we strengthen the governance system? I don't know, the government system is how the police to exercise, the legal structure to fully exercise, so that there is a deterrence within the tradition. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so quickly, yeah, these are questions that really have been in our minds, and we've been mulling over them for a long time in terms of really looking at a sustainability question and whether being project-based is really a problem or an opportunity. But I think to answer your question is to think that to say that we partly are on that course, and thinking in terms of funding agencies, USAID, with the whole localization focus and the emphasis of working closely with government and government development plans, I think is a step or a notch, closer to that, because, thinking about governments, investing in governments is really looking at systems growth, and building the system so that we have less and less dependency on the funding agencies. And thinking in terms of the local organizations, of course, I would say that maybe the development partners are better positioned because maybe they have staying power, thinking of 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. So they are better placed to think about the sustainability of the ideas they come up with. But really, what is sustainability? I think sustainability is getting to that point where we no longer need the funding. We no longer need, or at least to the extent that we have been depending on it in the last maybe 20 years or so, and more and more depending on our governments and our private sector, even our communities, the fact that we continue to improve trade, we continue to improve business, we continue to improve the governance and governance systems, the ability of the local communities and the LDOs to engage the community in terms of their opinions and their thoughts about how government programs should be driven is really what is at the center of the question of sustainability. So to answer your question, I think we are on that journey with what USAID has been focused on the question of localization and the question of working much more closely with the governments and targeting the government development plans. Thank you.
Thank you for those 3 excellent questions, and thank you, the panel, for the great answers. We can have another question now. All right, we've got a few hands over here. Of course, the microphone, now you have to run.
Good morning.
Here she comes, here she comes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sylvester Barra. I work in Karamoja, Uganda. My question goes to Dr. Dereje. And again, as a follow-up from what Yassine presented, we have these intergovernmental coordination mechanisms that Yassine mentioned, and these mechanisms defined frameworks for cooperation and collaboration to address cross-border conflicts. We have this mechanism signed, but we don't see execution. We don't see implementation of those action points. So the question is, what are we not doing well? And what is IGAD doing to hold these governments accountable? Specifically looking at what was signed between the Kenya government and the Turkana government. We also have others that have been signed between the South Omo and the Kenya government. My second question also goes to JB. You talked about CSOs surviving. So the question is, we know that the context is a bit competitive for them, and they're trying to tap into opportunities that are coming up. But then how do we ensure that within that survivability, they're able to coordinate effectively so that they can be able to plan together, they can be able to share the information with each other, and that can be able to promote their working together in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Dereje, would you like to start out?
Thank you very much. Again, I will be very general. If we are specifically talking about cattle rustling and issues related with that, because most of the other development actions have been taken, countries are really striving to invest as per their agreement. One of the agreements is to develop cross-border areas, to invest in cross-border areas, so that the infrastructure that we are developing are serving the communities across the border. This has been demonstrated both by Kenya and Ethiopia. and even going further, getting loan from Development Bank, investing in water infrastructure, market infrastructure, border crossing points. There are a lot of positive development in that direction. With regard to conflicts, animal wrestling, these are the political process that we are expecting slowly developing in each and every part of the country. We know Uganda has disarmed, and the other neighbors have not disarmed, and that has a negative impact on the others. Can we bring all the states to that level, allow them to sign a regional agreement, implement it in the culture of IGAD? It's a process that we are doing, because you can too much also intervene into a national context, and each of the national contexts are different dynamics, and it needed the right timing, the right place to do the actions. We are still hoping that we will reach some agreement in terms of controlling small arms, and that will aggravate commercialization. That aggravates commercialization of cattle rustling. Yes, in larger areas we did, and then things are happening. Things.
So as far as the local organizations are concerned in coordination, for the cross-border population, I mentioned earlier that this is almost absent in some areas, or have not been very active in others. So through the cross-border programs, and I'm working in one of the probably the largest within the region, the cross-border community resilience activity, is that we are trying to reinvigorate what has existed in the past. Some border locations actually have stronger networking, like for instance between the Kenya and Uganda borders, and you can even see in terms of the county governments or the local government on both sides of the borders, they tend to be more encouragement of coordination and engagement. So really one of the things we are doing to support local organizations is that we are establishing, where they are completely non-existent, those cross-border networks for coordination, and hoping that this would be taken up or taken over by the governments, because it can't just be that it would be constantly committed only through the donor funding. One of the other things we are also doing is advocating for the governments themselves to play a key role in taking the coordination role, even within their budgeting, at least at minimum 2 cross-border coordination meetings happening twice a year would be a good step towards that. And because naturally, anyway, the governments in these cross-border locations tend to depend a lot also on the support of local organizations, because they are the ones who have the funding or staying power for this. But ultimately is really to advocate for the local government to fund some of these coordination engagements and meetings for sustainability. Thank you.
I'm afraid we only had time for those 5 questions. It's exactly our time is up. So can we all stand up and do a happy clap, and then we'll hand over to Joshua?